Between the fading light of dying stars and the endless dark of space, there are stories best left unspoken. But this one refuses to stay buried. The Zorath Brood-Hive, once a proud, thriving species, became a warning carved into the bones of the galaxy. Through centuries of desperate isolation, they turned inwards, breeding only among themselves. The result? A lineage twisted beyond recognition, and a legacy so terrifying that even the boldest explorers feared to whisper their name. What really became of the Zorath? If mysteries like this grip you as much as they grip us, make sure you hit that like button. It helps more people discover these hidden corners of sci-fi history. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss the next deep dive. And hey, share this with a friend who loves a good cosmic horror story. Now let's unravel the dark legacy of the Zorath Brood-Hive. It began as many dark tales do, not with proof, but with whispers. Traders crossing the outer rims of the Nebralis system spoke of strange lights dancing between fractured moons. Some claimed they heard voices not through their radios but inside their own skulls, faint chittering songs that rose and fell like a broken choir. And then there were the disappearances. Small survey crews that entered Nebralis often never returned. Those few who did looked hollowed out, as if part of them had been left behind in the shadows. The name Zorath drifted from mouth to mouth, often hushed as if saying it too loudly might draw their attention. Don't follow the lights, old spacers warned. Don't answer the song. But what truly unsettled people wasn't the fear of death. It was the feeling that something was still alive out there, something that had endured against all odds, but in a way that broke every natural law of survival. So who were the Zorath really? Were they a species cursed by their own bloodline, or a living reminder that survival itself can sometimes be the most horrifying fate? Long before their name became a whisper of dread, the Zorath stood tall among the civilizations of the spiral arms. They weren't monsters then, they were visionaries. Their bodies, sleek and strong, shimmered with iridescent carapaces that caught starlight like shards of glass. And their voices, their voices could weave resonance into weapons or lull entire fleets into surrender. Other species called them the Singers of Nebralis, a title given with awe, not fear. At their height, the Zorath commanded living ships, organic vessels grown from their own bioengineering, pulsing with veins of light. They moved like schools of cosmic whales, elegant and untouchable. Their empire stretched across moons and planets, a patchwork of trade, song, and power. But no empire lasts forever. A chain of devastating wars eroded their strength. Resources dwindled, allies fell silent, and one by one their colonies were abandoned. The proud Zorath found themselves retreating, pulling deeper into the safety of the fractured moons they once ruled with pride. It was meant to be temporary, a pause to rebuild. Instead, it became their prison. From greatness to isolation, what could possibly go wrong? The answer, as history shows, was everything. The Nebralis system was beautiful, in a way only the void can be. Moons cracked open like broken eggshells, orbiting in slow, jagged paths around their dying star. For the Zorath, these shattered worlds became both sanctuary and cage. They carved tunnels into the rock, weaving sprawling hives lit by bioluminescent veins. From above, their colonies glowed like constellations trapped beneath the crust. At first, the seclusion felt safe. With enemies gone and foreign ships avoiding the unstable system, the Zorath could finally breathe. But safety had a cost. They were cut off from trade, from fresh gene lines, from the lifeblood that once connected them to the wider galaxy. The supply of outside mates, once a safeguard against genetic collapse, dwindled until it vanished entirely. Inside the hive, survival took precedence over tradition. Marriages between kin, once unthinkable, became common. Each generation was told the same story. Endure now, rebuild later. But later never came. The walls of the fractured moons closed tighter, and the Zorath turned inward, clinging to themselves. The question was no longer if the hive would pay a price for isolation, but when. And when that price came due, it was catastrophic. At first, no one wanted to admit it. The earliest changes were subtle, the kind of flaws you could brush aside with hope. A child born with uneven limbs, a singer whose resonance faltered mid-note, a broodling with translucent skin that bruised at the lightest touch. Elders told themselves it was coincidence, nature's imperfections, nothing more. But nature, when pressed too far, always leaves warnings. By the third generation, the flaws became harder to ignore. Some offspring emerged with twisted mandibles that could not close properly. Others had wings that refused to form at all, leaving them grounded in a species once born to soar between stars. Worst of all, the songs, the very essence of Zorath identity, began to splinter. What was once a harmony capable of bending metal grew discordant, like static tearing through a melody. Still, the hive pressed on. Mothers birthed brood after brood, believing strength lay in numbers. Even the broken were forced to sing, to work, to serve. But deep inside, a shadow of dread grew. The Zorath were watching themselves unravel. Yet they could not, or would not, stop. It wasn't just the body that was decaying. It was the soul of an entire species. By the 5th and 6th generations, the Zorath could no longer pretend. Their once proud forms had become grotesque reflections of what they used to be. Broodlings were born with too many eyes, clustered like jewels in patterns that seemed to watch from every angle. Others had no eyes at all, forced to crawl through the hive guided only by sound and scent. Carapaces softened into rubbery shells, leaving bodies vulnerable to disease. Wings came twisted, broken, or fused together in lumps of bone and chitin. And the songs, their sacred gift, turned into something monstrous. Where once they sang in harmonies that rivaled the music of stars, now came screeches, wails, and discordant vibrations that cracked stone and rattled minds. To outsiders, the sounds resembled cries of agony. To the Zorath, they were lullabies of survival. Explorers who drifted too close to Nebralis began to tell stories. They spoke of malformed creatures stalking the ruins, their glowing eyes peering from cracks in the rock, of swarms moving like shadows, humming broken hymns that seemed to crawl inside your skull. The Zorath had not been destroyed by enemies. They had created their own monsters and become them. The wider galaxy, once filled with allies, rivals, and trading partners, slowly erased the Zorath from memory. At first, there were whispers of pity, tragic tales of a noble race fallen on hard times. But as their songs grew twisted and their forms became alien even to their kin, those whispers turned into avoidance. Charts marked Nebralis as cursed, a place of death and shadows. Merchants who once thrived on Zorath trade routes chose longer, costlier paths rather than risk passing through their space. Records of their empire faded from archives. Scholars quietly removed their names from histories, as if pretending the Zorath had never existed would erase the shame of their collapse. Yet the hive endured, unseen and unwanted. They became phantoms, their only contact with the outside world filtered through rumors of glowing eyes and unsettling cries drifting across the void. To most, the Zorath were no longer a people. They were a cautionary myth. But myths have power, and the Zorath, twisted and broken as they were, still lived. Forgotten by the galaxy, they became something worse, ignored. And in that silence they grew into nightmares waiting to be rediscovered. It was curiosity that doomed them, the kind that pushes explorers into places no sane person would tread. The first expeditions into Nebralis began as routine surveys. A system with fractured moons and strange energy readings was too tempting to ignore. But what the crews found was nothing like the sterile beauty of dead worlds. Survivors described tunnels that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, as if the rock itself were alive. They spoke of chittering voices echoing through caverns, though no creature could be seen. And when the Zorath finally revealed themselves, it was never as individuals. It was as swarms, deformed figures shuffling in the dark, their eyes glowing like embers, their broken songs vibrating through bone. One crew reported hearing their own names whispered by the hive, though none of them spoke the Zorath tongue. Another told of shadows moving just out of sight, following them no matter how fast they ran. Most expeditions never returned. Those few who did came back pale, trembling, their eyes always drifting to the corners of rooms as if expecting something to crawl out of the dark. The explorers sought knowledge. Instead, they carried nightmares back to the galaxy. At the center of every hive was a broodmother, and it was through them that the Zorath's terrible cycle endured. Towering, immobile figures anchored deep within the tunnels, they existed only to birth. Their swollen forms filled entire chambers, their bodies pumping with glowing veins as thousands of eggs pulsed beneath translucent skin. But survival came at a horrifying cost. Inbred genetics guaranteed that many of the young would never live past hatching. Deformities were so common that brood mothers produced thousands at once, knowing only a fraction would survive. Still, they sang to every egg, their voices a guttural, fractured echo of the songs that once shaped galaxies. To outsiders, these brood chambers were visions of hell, walls slick with resin, the air thick with humidity, and the ceaseless sound of cracking shells. Explorers who stumbled upon them often described the experience as watching despair reproduce. And yet, despite the endless suffering, the Zorath endured. For the hive, mothers did not mourn their broken children. They saw each survival as a victory, each scream as proof the hive still lived. It wasn't beauty. It wasn't progress. It was persistence, grim, relentless, and unstoppable. Any other species would have collapsed under the weight of such suffering, but the Zorath refused extinction. Broken bodies, twisted bloodlines, crumbling songs, it didn't matter. They clung to life with a desperation that terrified even seasoned historians. Brood after brood, generation after generation, they endured. No matter how grotesque the mutations, no matter how many were born dead, enough survived to keep the hive crawling forward. It was as if pain itself had become their fuel. The more nature tried to erase them, the harder they fought to remain. To some, this persistence looked like strength. After all, how many species could survive isolation, famine, genetic collapse, and still emerge, however twisted, on the other side? But to others, it was something far darker, a curse, a reminder that life, stripped of balance, can become more horrifying than death. And here lies the haunting truth. The Zorath weren't just surviving, they were multiplying. Slowly, quietly, they spread across the fractured moons, filling every cavern, every tunnel. A grotesque army of the unwanted, proving that existence itself can become the most terrifying legacy of all. The Zorath Brood-Hive stands as one of the galaxy's most chilling lessons. They were not destroyed by war, nor crushed by invaders. Their downfall came from within, from desperation, isolation, and choices made in the shadows of survival. What began as a proud species with songs that could move the heavens ended as a broken echo of itself, trapped in a cycle it could never escape. And yet, their persistence makes them unforgettable. Against every natural law, against every force that tried to erase them, the Zorath lived on. They are a warning etched in the cosmos. Survival at any cost is not always victory. Sometimes it is the most horrifying fate imaginable. So when you hear whispers of strange lights in Nebralis, or faint songs that do not belong to the stars, remember this tale. The Zorath still endure somewhere out there, not as conquerors, not as allies, but as shadows teaching us that the line between survival and monstrosity is thinner than we'd like to believe. If this story sent chills down your spine, imagine what other secrets the galaxy might be hiding. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover more haunting histories and strange legends of the stars. Drop a like if you enjoyed this dive, and share it with a friend who loves sci-fi as much as you do. And tell me in the comments, do you think the Zorath are cursed survivors, or proof that persistence itself can be monstrous?